Today, I'm standing just off North Shore Road at Wonderland Station, at the very north end of the MBTA Blue Line, to explore this line's entirety, as we take a 5-mile trip to Bowdoin, pointing out the facts, features, and secrets of Boston's Blue Line. Before we catch the train, however, a bit of background. What is today the Blue Line opened as the East Boston Tunnel Service between Maverick Square and Court Street, today's Government Center. The line was originally built as an easy way to get East Boston's then extensive streetcar network into downtown. The line was built for a reasonable price of $89 million in today's money, an insanely small amount for what the project was. The line wasn't stagnant, though, with Court Street closing soon after and an extension to Bowdoin Square taking its place, but more on that later. Major changes were taking place as the tunnel was eventually converted into a subway, as the MBTA, then MTA, prepared for an expansion northward, eventually reaching Wonderland over 2 expansions. The line was planned to be extended to Lynn, about 4 miles further north, but now the train just makes it about 1,200 feet beyond the end of the platform, in a turnaround shunt. Wonderland is notable for its spacious design, with its sizable atrium, as well as a slightly less lovely parking garage. Wonderland is also one of the best stations for access to the many beaches along this stretch of coastline, parallel to the Blue Line, namely Revere Beach. But the best station to visit the beaches is one stop further, at Revere Beach, a trench station, unique for the Blue Line, and an otherwise pretty unremarkable design. However, it's only 350 feet away from its namesake Revere Beach. Now, it's probably a good time to mention the origin of the line's blue color, being derived from the line's proximity to the water along its entire alignment. Next is Beachmont, an elevated station, the only such station on the Blue Line, with a very quirky design. This station was completely rebuilt after the passing of the ADA accessibility requirements. The station was also notable for a tower that stood on the outbound platform, but was dismantled between 2018 and 2019. We've now arrived at Suffolk Downs, a largely unremarkable station in a largely unremarkable area. The station is surrounded by a few houses, some marshland, and an abandoned racetrack, the Suffolk Downs Racetrack, from which the station gets its name. It is therefore no surprise that this is the Blue Line's least used station. This area is set to be redeveloped soon, so that might change. But perhaps Suffolk Downs' best kept secret would be the trolley tracks that exist just outside the station entrance, remnants of the Suffolk Downs and Gladstone streetcar loops, with the tracks once continuing as far north as Revere Beach, but no more. Heading further south to Orient Heights Station, another station right by the beach, with a fairly modern and clean design. Orient Heights is also one of the few examples of trains regularly terminating midway down a line. This is due to Orient Heights being home to the Blue Line's only maintenance facility, so you may see trains going in and out of the yard here. Another notable feature is this parking lot, right next to the station. Boring at first glance, but the parking lot is built around one of the sidings in the yard, meaning that sometimes you can see a train parked right next to a car. Wood Island, like Beachmont, was another station to be fully rebuilt as part of the ADA accessibility requirements, with a very understated brick design. This station is also surrounded by a few houses and nothing much else. But there is a lot of industry for Logan Airport, which is just to the southeast of here. But if you are ever at Wood Island, make sure you stop to look at the atrium. Anyways, speaking of Logan Airport, the next stop is Airport. Sandwiched in the shadow of a highway interchange, this station features a very spacious design, relocated from its original spot just after the tunnel incline to here, when the line was undergoing heavy modernization work. The station is a good spot to connect with the Silver Line SL3 bus, and to the airport itself, by way of shuttle buses. However, Airport Station is where something happens that makes the Blue Line very unique. You may have noticed that the Blue Line has been using overhead wires from Wonderland until here, one of just 2 heavy rail rapid transit lines in the United States to do so, the other being Cleveland's Red Line. But the Blue Line's tunnels were built for streetcars, and the tight tunnel profile necessitated very efficient use of space. A pantograph simply wouldn't comply with the loading gauge. So at airport, the train switches from a pantograph to third rail. It's here where the Blue Line enters the East Boston Tunnel, transitioning from the old alignment of the Revere Beach and Lynn Railroad into the tunnel built by the Boston Elevated Railway, now the MBTA. Soon after entering the tunnel, we arrive at Maverick Square Station, one of my favorite stations, not just on the Blue Line, but on the entire network, because of its unique design. The single island platform is by far the widest on the network, with a very modern design. This was the initial termination point before the line's northward extension. It's also just steps away from the Boston Harbor and surrounded by very pleasant neighborhoods. Back in the station, there's time to acknowledge the one-of-a-kind track diagrams, not present at any other MBTA station. Now it's time to descend into the tunnel under the harbor before arriving at the first station downtown, Aquarium. Aquarium Station was one of the 4 stations that opened with the initial tunnel, originally called Atlantic Avenue, to interchange with the existing elevated station on this site. Today, Aquarium is holding up fairly well since its refurbishment, and provides excellent access to its namesake New England Aquarium. It's also home to one of the most sloped platforms on the entire MBTA network. We've now arrived at State Station, or State Street, depending on which line you ride.
Next stop, State Street, change for Orange Line. Next stop, State. Doors will open on the right.
State Street is an example of a typical subway station in downtown, with side platforms and tiles on the walls. In the early 2000s, this station underwent a renovation project that spanned from 2004 all the way to 2011, the longest of any Blue Line station. Our next stop is Government Center Station, which is the interchange with the Green Line. This is one of the shortest distances between stations on the entire network. But what many people don't know is that this station used to be called Scollay Square. However, even before that, this station was called Court Street, named for the street above the platforms. It was a single-track terminus with platforms on either side. The station was designed to have 2 streetcars in the platforms at once, but this led to the tragic loss of 2 railway workers who were crushed between the 2 streetcars in the station. This was the last time this arrangement was ever used in an MBTA station. We've made it to the platforms at Government Center, but there are many signs of the station's old name, Scollay Under, named after Scollay Square, like here, here, or here. At the far end of the platform, you can see a section of wall that was not refurbished along with the station around it. The connection to the Green Line also couldn't be easier, just being upstairs from the Blue Line. Also, if you're ever at Government Center, have you ever stopped to admire the wonderful head house in the middle of City Hall Plaza? And speaking of the famous or possibly infamous Boston City Hall, it's right over there. For a time in the early days of the East Boston Tunnel, trains terminated at present-day Government Center. But the subway did receive one final extension, oddly just one stop to Bowdoin Square. We've made it to Bowdoin Station, the end of the Blue Line, and one of the most interesting stations on the entire network. For one, Bowdoin is the only inaccessible station left on the entire heavy rail subway network, and the only place where trains go around a loop, instead of simply reversing, one of the holdovers from the streetcar era. The tightness of this loop is also the reason why Blue Line cars are so short, featuring only 2 doors per side. It is also the only station left to feature a platform for just 4 cars. You may have noticed that the Blue Line trains feature door buttons, a seemingly odd addition considering the automatic door operation everywhere else. But the Bowdoin platforms could not be altered to accommodate 6-car trains, as is now standard on all the other subway lines in Boston. So they had to include this feature in order to not have doors opening into the tunnels. While this is technically the end of the Blue Line, it's not the end of the tracks, because if you walk down to the very end of the outbound platform, you will see that there's a spur track from the main loop. The spur track leads down to the abandoned Cambridge Street portal, which has connecting tracks with the Red Line. This is because the Blue Line originally didn't have a yard of its own. The trains had to be serviced at the Red Line's now demolished Elliott Yard. Now we're in the median of the very busy Cambridge Street, where the Blue Line trains used to run. Not anymore, though. But there is still a proposal to build a tunnel to connect the Red and Blue Lines, which might actually see the closure of Bowdoin. So we might see a Cambridge Street line reinstated in the future. So now we've come to the entrance of Bowdoin Station, just over there. So thank you to all the people who watched the first video in this series where we will cover all the MBTA lines. The next video in the series is already in the works and should be released pretty soon. Huge thanks again, and I'll see you around.